Don't go in
Don't
too
go in
deep.
too deep.
The studio was empty except for the two of them, and the rain that would not stop. It was past midnight. The gala was 3 days away, and this was supposed to be their final rehearsal, the last polish before he stood in front of 200 investors and danced like a man who had never once questioned his own footing. Instead, the music had stopped 10 minutes ago, and neither of them had moved to turn it back on. Their breathing was still heavy from the last routine. Her hand was still resting in his. He could feel her pulse in her wrist, quick, unguarded, nothing like the calm, composed woman who had walked into his life 6 months earlier. She adjusted his hand at her waist without looking up. "Lower," she said. "You lead from here, not your shoulders. You've told me that 40 times. And you still don't listen." He almost laughed. He didn't remember anymore the last time laughing had come easily. Somewhere in the last 6 months it had stopped being an effort. Their foreheads touched. Neither of them pulled back. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, the way he had wanted to for longer than he was willing to admit, and she let him. Her eyes closed. When he kissed her, it was not sudden. It was the end of a very long wait, the kind of kiss that happens after a person has already decided, quietly, weeks ago, and is only now catching up to their own heart. She kissed him back. For a moment there was nothing else in the room, not the rain, not the gala, not the 6 months that had brought them here. "I don't want tonight to end," he murmured against her. She went still. "Don't go in too deep," she whispered. He smiled because it sounded like teasing, like the dry, needling honesty she always spoke with. He opened his eyes to tell her she was too late to give that warning. That was when he saw the tears. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't teasing. She was standing in his arms, crying like someone already saying goodbye. 6 months earlier, none of this would have made any sense to him at all. 6 months earlier, Jae-hoon Kang did not dance. He did not laugh easily, either, and he had not cried in front of another person since he was 9 years old, the day his father told him that Kang men did not need comforting, only results. By 34, he had plenty of results. He ran one of Seoul's largest investment holding companies, the one his grandfather built and his father nearly destroyed, and Jae-hoon had spent a decade quietly rebuilding, deal by deal, until the family name meant something again. He had a penthouse with a view of the Han River that he rarely looked at. He had a marriage that had ended 8 months ago in a settlement negotiated by lawyers who knew him better than his ex-wife ever had. The divorce had been in every business paper in the city. Not because anyone cared about his heart. No one seemed to think he had one. But because his ex-wife's family sat on the board of a rival conglomerate, and a broken marriage meant broken alliances, and broken alliances meant nervous shareholders. His sister Jae-yoon was the only person who still called him just to talk, and even she had started to sound worried lately, the careful worry of someone measuring her words before she said them. "You're not eating," she told him one evening, letting herself into his apartment with the spare key he'd forgotten she had. "I eat." "You exist. That's not the same thing." He didn't answer. She set a small paper bag of takeout on his counter anyway and studied him the way their mother used to, back before their mother had learned not to. "There's a gala," Jae-yoon said. 3 months from now. Direct investors, half the families you need on your side after the divorce mess. You're expected to open the dance with the Song Foundation chair." "I don't dance." "You will. I already hired someone." He looked up, finally interested. "Hired who?" "An instructor, highly recommended. Private studio, no press, total discretion." Jae-yoon smiled the particular smile she used when she already knew she'd won an argument before it started. You start Monday. The apartment Jae-yoon let herself into that evening told its own story, if anyone had bothered to read it. A kitchen that still had its packaging tape on half the cabinets, 8 months after the divorce, because he'd never gotten around to unpacking the life he was supposed to be starting alone. A row of unopened mail on the counter, mostly invitations he had no intention of accepting. A single photograph, turned face down in a drawer he thought no one knew about, that Jae-yoon had found once while looking for scissors and never mentioned again. He expected someone older. Someone stern and gray-haired and accustomed to bullying reluctant executives into passable waltzes. He walked into the studio on Monday evening already irritated, already composing the sentence he would use to end the lesson early. He never got the chance to say it. She was standing at the center of the floor when he came in, adjusting the sound system, her back to the door. When she turned, the first thing he noticed was that she did not look surprised to see him, and did not look impressed, either. Most people in Seoul looked at Jae-hoon Kang and saw a name before they saw a face. She looked at him the way she might look at anyone who had walked in 10 minutes late for their appointment, which he realized, checking his watch, he had. "You're late," she said, not an accusation, a fact. "I had a call. I had a client before you who also had a call. He's not the CEO of anything, and he still managed to arrive on time." She held out her hand. "Adiz, I'll be teaching you." He didn't offer his name. He assumed she knew it. Everyone in this city seemed to. "You can keep your name to yourself if you like," she said, reading him easily, which unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. "I don't need it to teach you how to move." "And what do you need?" "Your ego," she said. "Left at the door, it throws off your balance." He almost turned around and left. He was fairly certain, looking back later, that some small, stubborn part of him stayed only because no one had spoken to him like that in years, and he had forgotten how strange it felt to be handled instead of managed. She had rules he learned quickly. She never taught a client for longer than 6 months. The gala was timed, conveniently or not, to land just before that window closed. She did not attend her clients' events once the lessons ended. She did not accept invitations to dinners, weddings, celebrations. She taught, she left, and as far as he could tell, she vanished completely from the lives of the people she had spent months transforming. "That's an odd way to run a business," he said during their 3rd lesson, as she corrected his posture with 2 fingers against his spine. "It's not a business, it's a practice." "Of what?" "Discipline," she said. "Yours mostly." He laughed before he could stop himself, a short, surprised sound, like something breaking loose. She glanced at him, something flickering behind her eyes that looked, for half a second, like satisfaction. "There it is," she said. "There's what?" "You laughed. I was starting to think you couldn't." He didn't have an answer for that, so he didn't give one. But he noticed, on the drive home, that he was still smiling, faintly, for no reason he could name. The lessons themselves developed a shape he came to recognize and eventually to crave. She always arrived before him, no matter how early he came, as if the studio belonged to her and he was simply a guest she tolerated. She warmed up alone in the mirror while he changed shoes, humming something low and unfamiliar, some tune from home that he never asked the name of because he liked not knowing. Liked that there were parts of her the lessons hadn't given him yet, parts he had to earn. She was a patient teacher, but not a gentle one. When his footwork slipped, she told him plainly. When his attention drifted to his phone, buzzing on the bench with some bored matter that could wait, she took the phone, turned it face down, and said nothing at all, which somehow embarrassed him more than a lecture would have. "You run a company of 1,200 people," she said once, watching him fumble a simple turn for the 4th time. "And you can't remember 4 counts of 8. It's different. It's exactly the same. You're used to people adjusting to you. Dancing doesn't adjust. You adjust to it or you step on someone's foot." She smiled slightly. "Usually mine. I haven't stepped on your foot in 2 weeks." "I've been keeping count," she said, and turned the music back on before he could ask what the count actually was. There was an ease that grew between them he didn't remember experiencing with anyone, not even in the earliest days of his marriage, when everything had still felt possible. It wasn't dramatic. It was built from small things. The way she started leaving 2 coffees on the bench instead of 1, without ever asking if he wanted it, simply assuming, correctly, that he did. The way he started arriving in clothes that weren't tailored for boardrooms, because she'd told him once, dryly, that Italian wool did not forgive a man who couldn't dance in it. He learned to laugh again in that room before he learned it anywhere else. It always surprised him when it happened. A short, unguarded sound that seemed to catch even him off guard, like a door creaking open after years of disuse. Each time, she would look at him with something unreadable, something that might have been pride, or might have been the particular ache of watching a person come back to life, while knowing, privately, that she had already decided not to stay for the rest of the story. The lessons became the one appointment in his week he did not try to reschedule. He told himself it was discipline, that a man preparing to stand in front of 200 people who were quietly deciding whether to trust him again could not afford to be a bad dancer. But discipline did not explain why he started arriving early. It did not explain why he noticed the small chip in her front tooth when she smiled too wide, or the particular, unhurried way she counted time under her breath, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like she was speaking a private language only the 2 of them understood. She taught him that dancing was not about precision. "Everyone comes in trying to be correct," she told him, one evening, adjusting his shoulders down from where tension had crept them toward his ears. "Correct is stiff. Correct is armor." "I'm not interested in armor." "What are you interested in?" "Whether you can let someone lead you somewhere you didn't plan to go." She stepped back. "Try again, and this time don't think." He tried. He was terrible at not thinking, had built an entire career on the opposite instinct, but something in her patience made the trying feel less like failure and more like practice. By the 2nd month, his company's board noted, without understanding why, that he seemed sharper in meetings, calmer. His assistant mentioned, carefully, that he'd started leaving the office before 9 most nights, which he hadn't done since before the divorce. He didn't tell anyone where he went instead. The things he learned about her, he learned slowly, and mostly by accident, because she deflected direct questions the way she deflected an off-balance lead, smoothly, without ever quite stopping the momentum of the conversation. He learned she volunteered on weekends at a youth center in a part of the city most of his colleagues had never visited, teaching children who could not afford proper studios how to move like they mattered. He learned this only because he followed her once, on a Saturday, telling himself he needed to discuss a schedule change, and found her kneeling on a gymnasium floor, laughing, showing an 8-year-old boy how to spin without falling. He learned she sent most of what she earned back home to Lagos, to a mother and two younger siblings, because one evening her phone buzzed with a message in a language he didn't understand, and her face changed, softened, and tightened at once, before she put the phone away and said nothing about it. He learned that whenever he asked about her future, about what came after the 6 months ended, she smiled the same practiced smile and changed the subject with the same practiced ease, like a dancer sidestepping a misstep so cleanly the audience never noticed it happened. "What are you running from?" He asked her once, after a lesson, when the studio was quiet and the city outside had gone soft and blue with evening. She considered the question longer than he expected. "I'm not running from anything," she said finally. "I'm running toward something." "Toward what?" She smiled, but it didn't reach all the way to her eyes this time. "You should go home, Mr. Kang. Big week ahead of you." It was the first time she'd called him by name. He noticed. He wondered later if she'd done it on purpose. A small door opened just wide enough to remind him there was a whole house behind it he wasn't allowed into yet. The weeks that followed blurred into something he didn't have language for, because his life had never had room in it for this kind of ordinary happiness. Dinners after late rehearsals, in the small, unglamorous restaurants she preferred, where no one recognized his face, and the food was better than anything served at the events he usually attended. Walks in the rain because she refused to let weather cancel a lesson, insisting that a dancer who couldn't move gracefully in wet shoes wasn't really a dancer at all. Long stretches of comfortable silence that he'd never once managed with his ex-wife, not even in the earliest, easiest days of that marriage. His employees noticed the change before he did. His assistant told Jae-yoon, who told him, laughing, that the office had taken to calling it the improvement, as if he'd undergone some medical procedure rather than simply started learning how to be a person again. His ex-wife noticed, too, from whatever distance she now kept, and word of the mysterious dance instructor reached her through the same gossip channels that had once carried news of his marriage's failure. She did not call, but she mentioned it, pointedly, to a mutual friend, in a tone that made its way back to him within a week, dressed up as concern and unmistakably something else. He didn't care. That, more than anything, told him how much had already changed. There was a night, early in the 4th month, when a lesson ran long and neither of them noticed until the studio manager knocked to say he was locking up. They ended up on the street outside, in no hurry to part ways, and somehow that turned into dinner at a small noodle place 2 blocks over, the kind of restaurant with handwritten menus and a television playing a variety show no one was watching. "Tell me something true," he said, over bowls that had gone half cold while they talked. "Something you wouldn't tell a client." "You are a client." "I'm asking anyway." She turned her chopsticks over in her hands, considering him the way she considered a student's posture, carefully, looking for what was really holding him up. "I used to want to perform," she said finally. "Not teach, perform, big stages. The kind of dancing where thousands of people forget to breathe at the same time." "What happened?" "Life happened." She said it lightly, the way people say things they've practiced saying lightly so many times the weight has been sanded off the outside, even if it's still there underneath. "I teach instead. It's not a lesser thing. I used to think it was. I don't anymore." "Do you miss it, the stay?" "Every day," she said, and then, as if she'd revealed more than she meant to, she asked him about his company instead, and he let her, because he was learning slowly. The way he was learning everything with her, that some doors needed to be found again on their own time, not forced open. Other nights were simpler. Walks after the rain, when the city smelled like wet asphalt and neon. And she'd insist they take the long way back to his car for no reason, except that she liked how the streetlights looked doubled in the puddles. A Sunday when she showed up at his office unannounced, appalled that he'd been eating lunch at his desk again, and marched him out to a nearby park with 2 sandwiches from a place she refused to name because, she said, if he knew where it was he'd send an assistant to buy the whole block. He found himself remembering details about her the way she seemed to remember them about everyone else, that she took her coffee with too much sugar and pretended it was normal, that she always checked the exits of a room before she checked anything else, that she went quiet in a very particular way whenever a phone call came in from a number he never saw her save. He didn't ask about that number. He filed it away instead, the way you file away a loose thread you're not yet ready to pull. By the time the 5th month arrived, Jae-yoon had stopped bringing him takeout out of worry and started bringing it out of curiosity, fishing for details about the woman her brother would not stop mentioning, however carefully he tried to disguise it as talk about the gala. "You're happy," she told him once, studying his face over dinner with the particular satisfaction of someone who'd been right about something. "I haven't seen you happy since before you knew what a merger was." He didn't deny it. He was happy in a way that felt fragile and unfamiliar, like a language he was only beginning to speak fluently. He didn't yet understand that the woman teaching it to him had already, quietly, begun preparing to leave. Meanwhile, unseen by him, an email arrived in Adi's inbox from a performing arts academy in London. The kind of institution she had once, years ago, in another life, dreamed of walking into as faculty rather than applicant. She read it twice. She did not reply. She closed the laptop and went to teach her 6 o'clock lesson, and if her smile was a little more careful that evening, he was too caught up in his own steps to notice. The night the power went out was 3 weeks before the gala. A storm had rolled over Seoul all afternoon, and by the time they reached the final section of the routine, the studio lights flickered twice and then died altogether, plunging the room into the soft gray of emergency lighting. The main sound system cut out with it. Somewhere she found a small battery speaker, and thin, tinny music filled the space instead, and for a moment they simply stood there in the half-dark, looking at each other. "One last dance," she asked, "before I call it a night." There was no need for elegance in the near dark, no board members watching, no expectations of correctness. He pulled her into position, and they moved without counting, without commentary, without her stopping every few bars to fix his shoulders. It was, he thought, the first time they had ever simply danced instead of practiced. When the song ended, neither of them stepped back. He kissed her before he'd fully decided to. She kissed him back before, he suspected, she'd fully decided to either, and for 1 full minute, standing in the dark with rain against the windows, everything about his life that had felt so carefully managed for so many years simply fell away. Then she stepped back. "Please," she said quietly, "don't go in too deep." He thought she was afraid of him, of his world, of the particular chaos that came with loving someone whose face appeared in business magazines. He told her gently that he wasn't going anywhere, that he could wait as long as she needed. She didn't answer that. She only nodded and gathered her things and left before he could see whatever was happening on her face. He didn't know, walking to his car that night, that she had cried the entire drive home. In the days after the blackout kiss, something in her shifted, subtly enough that he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. She was still patient with his footwork, still quick with the dry corrections he'd come to rely on, but she'd stopped lingering after lessons. The dinners stopped. The unhurried walks stopped. When he asked her once if everything was all right, she told him she was simply tired, that the gala was close and there was still work to do, and he let the lie stand because he didn't yet have proof it was won. "You've been somewhere else all week," he told her, during a rehearsal that had gone stiff and mechanical, all the ease drained out of it. "Where'd you go?" "Nowhere. I'm right here." "You're not, though." He stopped moving, forcing her to stop with him. "You haven't been right here since that night. What changed?" Nothing changed. But she wouldn't hold his eyes when she said it. And for a woman who had spent 6 months teaching him that a dancer's eyes never lied even when their feet did, the omission felt like its own kind of confession. He found the ticket by accident, the way most devastating discoveries happen, not through investigation, but through a phone left unlocked on a studio bench while she stepped out to take a call, a notification blooming across the screen at the worst possible moment. Flight confirmation, one way, departure 3 weeks after the gala. Destination, London. He didn't mean to look further. He told himself that later and mostly believed it. But once he'd seen it, he couldn't stop himself from opening the email thread beneath it, the Academy's offer. The position, the deadline for her decision, circled in her own handwriting on a printed copy tucked inside her bag. When she came back into the room, he was still holding the phone. "You're leaving," he said, not a question. She took the phone from his hand, carefully, like she was retrieving something fragile. "You shouldn't have looked at that." "You weren't going to tell me." There was nothing to tell yet. "There's a plane ticket, a D's. There's a job offer. That's not nothing." His voice, usually so measured in boardrooms full of people twice his enemy's size, cracked slightly on her name. "Focus on the gala," she said. "That's what matters right now." "Don't do that. Don't manage me." "I'm not managing you. I'm protecting." She stopped herself. Protecting what? She didn't answer. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked like she didn't have a graceful way out of a room, and instead of finding one, she simply left without another word, leaving him standing alone under the studio's bright, unforgiving lights. They didn't speak, beyond the necessities of rehearsal, for 4 days. It was Jae-yoon, of all people, who finally told him the rest, because Adiz had once mentioned it to her in confidence, years before she ever became his instructor, back when the two women had crossed paths at a charity function neither of them expected the other to remember. "She lost someone," Jae-yoon said carefully, sitting across from him in his kitchen watching him absorb it. "A fiancé, back home before she came to Korea. An accident, I don't know all of it, she never said much. But after that, she made herself a rule. Never stay anywhere long enough to need anyone. Teach people to dance, help them heal, and leave before anyone can need her too much or she can need them." "That's not a life," Jae-hoon said quietly. "That's a sentence she's serving." "Maybe, but it's hers to serve however she wants." He thought about the academy in London, the dream she had clearly been chasing long before she'd ever walked into his studio, the years of sacrifice that had earned her the invitation. Accepting it meant leaving everything, including him. Refusing it meant abandoning the one thing she had built her entire adult life toward, for a man she'd known 6 months. He went to find her that night, not to argue, but simply to sit with her. And for once she let him, in the small apartment he'd never been invited into before, a narrow, warmly lit space with photographs on every wall. A family he'd never met smiling out from frames that had clearly traveled with her from one country to the next. His name was Chindu, she said, before he'd asked anything at all, as if she'd been waiting months for someone to be patient enough to earn the answer. We were supposed to get married the year I turned 24. He was driving to see me the night it happened. A truck lost its brakes on a hill outside Enugu. I found out over the phone from his sister, 3 hours before I was supposed to be trying on my dress. He said nothing. He had learned in 6 months of lessons that silence was sometimes the only correct choreography. After that, she went on, I promised myself something, not out loud. Just to myself, lying in a hospital waiting room I didn't need to be in because there was nothing left to wait for. I promised I would never again build a life around a person who could be taken from me without warning. So I stopped staying. I taught people to dance. I gave them everything I had for exactly as long as they needed me, and then I left before either of us could need the other too much. It was never about them. It was never about you. It was about making sure I never had to feel that phone call again. And London. London is the thing I wanted before Chindu died. The thing I put away because grief doesn't leave room for ambition. 10 years later, they finally offered it to me, a real teaching position, a real stage, students who could actually become something. It's everything I told myself I'd get back to someday, once I was ready. She looked at him, eyes wet but steady. I didn't expect someday to arrive at the same time as you. He understood, finally, why she'd asked him not to go in too deep. She hadn't been protecting herself from him. She'd been trying to protect him from a decision she was terrified she'd force him to make for her. And protecting herself, still, from the particular kind of loss she had spent 10 years building a whole life around avoiding. The gala arrived faster than either of them was ready for. The ballroom of the Grand Chosun glittered with the particular brightness reserved for rooms full of people who had a great deal to lose and were determined not to show it. Investors, foundation chairs, a scattering of press kept carefully at bay. His ex-wife, seated 3 tables from the stage, watching with an expression he no longer had the energy to interpret. Backstage, Adiz straightened his collar with hands that were, for once, not entirely steady. Nervous, he asked, for you. Don't embarrass me. He almost laughed, almost. Instead, he caught her hand before she could pull it back. Whatever happens after tonight, he said, thank you for all of it. Don't do that, she said softly. Don't say goodbye things, not yet. I'm not saying goodbye, I'm saying thank you. There's a difference. He held her hand a moment longer. You taught me that too, actually, somewhere around month 3. She laughed despite herself, a wet, unsteady sound, and wiped quickly at her eyes before her makeup could betray her in front of 200 people who would spend the next hour deciding, once again, whether Jae-hoon Kang was a man worth trusting with their money. He watched her compose herself the way she'd once taught him to compose his own posture, spine straight, chin level, breathe from the center, and thought, not for the first time, that she had spent so many years teaching other people how to stand up straight that no one had ever quite gotten around to holding her up in return. For what it's worth, he said, I think you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I think it's exhausting you. She didn't answer that. The music started before she had to. They danced the way people dance when a room has disappeared around them. Not performing, exactly, though every movement was flawless. but simply moving together the way they had learned to over 6 months of late evenings and rain-soaked windows and one dark room lit only by emergency lights. When the final note landed, the room was on its feet before he'd even fully straightened. He didn't wait for the applause to settle. He took the microphone from the MC's stand, a gesture no one in the room expected, least of all Adiz, who went very still at the edge of the floor. 6 months ago, he said, most of you had written me off. I'd written myself off, if I'm honest. The ripple of surprised laughter moved through the crowd, the kind of laughter that comes from hearing an uncomfortable truth spoken plainly. I hired a dance instructor because my sister insisted, and because I needed to look competent in front of all of you tonight. I got competent, but that's not what she actually taught me. He looked at her. She was crying quietly, trying not to be seen doing it. She taught me how to live again, he said. I don't know how else to say it, so thank you, Adiz. Whatever happens next, thank you. The applause that followed was long and warm and utterly beside the point to both of them, because they were only looking at each other. The airport, 3 weeks later, was exactly as loud and indifferent as airports always are, entirely unmoved by the fact that someone's whole life was quietly ending inside it. He walked her to the security line, carrying nothing, because there was nothing left for him to carry that would change what came next. You could ask me to stay, she said, not quite looking at him. I could, he said, but I'm not going to. She finally looked up. You spent years building toward this, he said. I'm not going to be the reason you don't take it. Real love isn't supposed to be a cage, Adiz. It's supposed to be the thing that makes you brave enough to go get what you actually want. Her eyes filled again, and this time she didn't try to hide it. I told you not to go in too deep, she said. You did. He almost smiled. I never actually promised I'd listen. She kissed him then, quickly, fiercely, the way people kiss when they are trying to memorize something. Then she stepped back and joined the line and did not look back again, because she'd told him once that she never did. It was easier that way, cleaner, the only way she knew how to leave without breaking entirely. He watched until she was through security and out of sight, and then he went home to an apartment that felt, for the first time in months, unbearably quiet. 4 months passed. His company closed the largest deal of the year. His sister stopped asking, quite so carefully, whether he was eating. The city moved on, as cities do, and so, on the surface, did he. He hadn't planned the trip to London. It was genuine business. A fund he'd been courting for over a year finally wanted to talk terms, and the meetings ran 2 days longer than expected, leaving him with an unplanned free afternoon in a city he'd never had a reason to enjoy before. He was walking through a small square near Covent Garden, half listening to his phone, when he heard it, faint, familiar, carried on the wind between buildings. A particular rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, counted under a voice he would have recognized anywhere in the world. He turned the corner and found her in the middle of a small crowd of children, all of them badly out of step and clearly delighted about it, spinning and laughing under her patient direction. She hadn't seen him yet. He watched her correct a small girl's posture with 2 gentle fingers against her spine, the exact gesture she'd once used on him, and something in his chest loosened that had been tight for 4 months without his fully realizing it. Then she looked up and saw him and went completely still. You came all this way, she said when he was close enough to hear. I promised I wouldn't go too deep, he said. I never promised I'd stop following the rhythm. She laughed, a real laugh, bright and startled. and something in her face broke open the way it hadn't allowed itself to since the night she'd told him goodbye at the gate. She crossed the small square toward him without waiting to be asked, and this time it was she who kissed him first, in front of a dozen delighted children, and a city that had no idea it was witnessing the end of a very long 6 months. Sometimes love is not about holding someone back. Sometimes it is about becoming the reason they finally believe they can stop running. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who loves unforgettable love stories. And if you're passionate about powerful Afro-Korean romances filled with emotion, culture, and unexpected twists, hit the subscribe button and become part of our family. Click the next video on your screen and let another incredible journey begin. I'll see you there.